If I was meeting you for the first time, one of the first things that we would probably share is what we do, such as what is my job or what is my hobbies. Many times we connect people with what they do. We frequently associate our own identity with what we do. This can be especially challenging if you do a lot. So, in this episode, we're going to discuss one of the activities of God, one of the things that he does. Welcome to the He So I Project, produced by Redeeming Identity. This is a podcast for people that are searching to know who God is and discover who they were designed to be. This should pretty much cover everyone. Hello, I am one of your hosts, Dr. Eric Moyer.
And I am a co-host, Eric Miller.
So, Eric, if you noticed, we didn't start off with our introduction saying what we do.
I did notice that indeed.
So I thought that we would kind of get into that as we're talking a lot today about what does God do? With the beginning of understanding that we as people put a lot of emphasis in our purpose, in what we do. In your job, you probably get tied to what you do quite a bit.
Certainly, if it's okay to say it, as a
Go
pastor, there are a lot of interesting assumptions made about what pastors do. And a lot of the big ones are, well, don't you only work on Sundays? And I bet you have a great golf game and things of that nature, which are patently false, as evidenced by my golf game. But yes, there are a lot of assumptions made, and even just saying the word, I think it's fun to have at least a time of some clarification to say, okay, I'm a pastor, but here's what that means. Mm-hmm. So, yeah,
I think I hear a lot of people whenever I'm introduced as Dr. Moyer. You get either one of two things. One, they assume that you're a medical doctor, which I am not.
Sure.
The other thing is they may understand if they see the PhD at the end instead of doctor, they think that you are a professor at a university, which would be really cool. I love teaching. And that's really one of the things that is fun is I see myself as a researcher. I do a lot of research, but more than anything, I like to teach. I've always been a person that find something that is valuable, that is important. And I want to help people understand that. I want to help people learn how to put that into their lives. Sure. And so that's why I've been a teacher. I have been a professor at a university. I'm doing a podcast, and I am also now an author. And so, but it's kind of interesting that it took me a while to figure out that all of these things have one thing in common. I'm always teaching, which is kind of what I do. Whatever the title is, whatever the actual job is, it's going to end up somewhere having to do with education or teaching. So I think we have a sense that what we do is important to us. And I think that goes back to part of how we were designed, how we were created, because the attribute that we're going to be looking at today is focused on something that God does. And it starts off with the very first verse in the Bible. It's like the first verse that people memorize pretty much whenever they're trying to memorize verses is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's our verse. That's the beginning part. If you open up your Bible, that's the very first thing that you'll see. And it tells us something about who God is and that he is the creator. So what do you think that means to you? I mean, what does that tell us about who God is, Eric?
Well, I love the way you're setting it up, because when we've talked about identity before, it's the idea that our activity reveals our identity, because our identity, all that we do comes from who we are, what our identity is. And so you're talking about some of the most profound verses in the Bible. In fact, if you just take the very beginning of Genesis 1:1, and it's in the beginning God.
Yep.
So just even starting there, boy, that communicates so much to us. In the beginning, before there was anything, there was God. And then God did what? He created.
Right.
And so that tells us and reveals throughout Scripture so much about the very nature of God, that He is a creator. In fact, we read in Psalms that the heavens declare the glory of God, that there are all these things in His creation that, when examined, reveal His creativity, reveal His identity,
Right.
and are actually put there so that we might, and I think worldwide people do, is they have an idea that there is something bigger that has created what we see around us. So that it's not to be understated how significant to put that right up front in the Bible, that in the beginning, God created.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it starts us off with a lot of what we talk about whenever we talk about identity. We talk about these 4 Ps. Principles, perspectives, purposes, and priorities. And you're right. Just that one verse, if we look at that, it tells us a lot about who God is. What are the truths that are knowable about who God is? What are the perspectives that He sees things from, that He holds? And I love the one that you started with, is that in the beginning, God. And that right there is a perspective, because we have a very definite perspective of being the created and being in creation. His perspective, which I always love to remind myself, is that He's not in creation. He is not part of creation. He is before anything ever existed. He is outside of that creation. He sees everything from the beginning to the end. We try to see God, put God into boxes the way that we see things as part of creation. But He's not. His perspective is that He is outside of it.
Well, and again, this is where our even with the amazing abilities that God has given us to understand, this bumps up against the edges of, I think, what we're even able to fathom.
Right.
That God is outside of time. He is not living time in this current moment as it is unfolding for us.
Yeah.
But He is present at all times, at all places, in His fullness. And again, speaking of principles, if you start saying, well, this is something that is true of God, in the beginning, before anything, there was God, then our perspective on who He is and how we relate to Him changes, because it gives us things like God is never caught off guard. God is never surprised.
Right.
And although we may be surprised and think, oh my goodness, how could something like this happen? God is not surprised by it, because He is outside of time. He's already lived through it from a human perspective. And so again, just teasing that one little thread of such a big idea out, for me, it not only deepens my reverence and awe of God, but it delights my heart to know that He is working at all times and all places for His glory and my good. So, I mean, I'm probably getting a little ahead of the cart right now, but again, these, in this case, these 4 words, and we could think about it our entire lives and not find the bottom of it.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think that's a good starting point. Is we have a principle right there, is that one, there is a God. Okay. And that goes back to what we talked about in our last episode. If you haven't gone to listen to that last discussion, it was the discussion of there is a God and that He is knowable and He wants to be known. And He even gives us His name, the name that He is, the I am. And even back at the beginning, in the beginning, God, He is the I am. He is who he always will be. And he's acting in accordance with who he is, even at the very beginning. And so we have a principle of that there is a God, but then we have a perspective that he is before all things. He is above all things. He is outside of all things in the sense that he can see everything. Like you said, he knows everything. There's nothing that surprises him. But then also we have this perspective that because he created everything, everything is his. It's like the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. That covers everything. Every single thing that has ever existed exists because he created it. And because it exists because he created it, it belongs to him. That in itself is a perspective that he has. Like everything is mine. And everything is created, as he says, everything is created for my glory. That's what we were created for. We were created to be image bearers, reflectors of him, his glory, his identity, his nature. And we're the ones that screwed that up.
Yeah. And not to take too big of a turn, it's just the way that we see this applied by the Apostle Paul in Acts 17 at the Areopagus when he's having this debate with these Hellenistic philosophers. And he starts with this: I've seen in many ways that you're very religious. You even have a place for a statue to the unknown God. And so let me now tell you about that God. And he starts with, God does not dwell in temples. He is not fed as if he needs anything, but instead he's the one who gives everything. And as he's going down this list, again, tying it back to Genesis 1:1, is he's talking about God sets rulers and leaders up at a certain time and takes them out at a certain time, indicating his sovereignty. And then he says, I love this line, Paul says he does this so that he may be known, that we would come to know him. And so again, as you're talking about those principles of God is outside of time. God is the creator. He is the uncaused cause. He is the prime mover in all of life. Paul, I believe, takes that same principle and then he uses it to tell people about who God really is. Right. You Greeks are worshiping all these different gods. You're very religious. But let me tell you who God really is.
Yep.
This is the God you're looking for, and he's nothing like you think he is.
Yeah. It goes to Romans, where in Romans 1, where it says people can see the nature of God in his creation, because the fingerprint, whenever he creates, he leaves the impression of who he is, the reflection of who he is and what he has created. So no one is without excuse. No one is able to say, there is no God. Look around you. Stephanie and I had the opportunity to watch a couple of National Geographic, and I know National Geographic has a certain bent, but if you just listen to some of the science of how intricate and how interdependent everything in our world is, and you want to go, and that happened by chance?
Yeah.
It's like if you really start thinking about, there was just one part where they had an astronaut that basically was saying, our planet basically has the perfect balance of atmosphere to allow enough of the heat and the radiation to warm the planet to the right temperature, but not so thin that it lets in the dangerous radiation that could just boil us.
Yes.
It's perfectly balanced, not accidentally balanced, perfectly balanced.
If you take any one of those factors, and this is where the beauty of my wife is she just loves this stuff. And so she'll relay it to me, and she's much more scientifically minded. So I have to be careful in talking about it and even reading about it. But the idea that the Earth is on its axis at a certain angle, which allows seasons, that the small forces like gravity, if you increase it by not very much, all life would be reduced to animals of a couple of inches. And if you reduced it, we'd fling off the planet. If you increased it, we'd be very small. And all of these things that are taken for granted. I think the hard part there is it's like looking at the complexity of a cell phone and saying, well, there must have been an explosion in a metal shop somewhere that created it.
Right.
Which obviously, no.
Yeah.
There is complexity, as you're suggesting in Romans 1, that points to a creator. And I think even create more than he's just a creator. He is a beautiful artist.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So it's not just that he created. It's not just that he's amazingly powerful. It's that he is beautifully expressive in the moments that even so the eyeball was made in such a way not just to survive, but that we might see the works of his creation. And ultimately, his end goal is that we would glorify him.
Right. And it goes back to that we were created to glorify him, to give him glory, to recognize that he exists and that he is the creator, that he is the person that put all of this into motion. So it defines both principles and perspectives, but then it gets to that he has a purpose that comes from his identity. And we can talk about there's not just one purpose. I mean, he is perfectly balanced, but one of the things that he does is he creates. And you said it earlier, is that everything is created and comes from him. It's not that the perspective that, okay, he created the earth and everything, and then he kind of like sits back and he's just watching and just seeing what's going on. That's not what the Bible communicates. The Bible communicates that he is. It's that going back to the I am, if you want to think about it from the last time, is that who he was is who he is and it also communicates who he's going to be. So if he was a creator back in the beginning, it means that he was a creator like between now and then, is that he's still creating and he's going to continue to create.
Yes. And I think just even as you're saying that, I had the thought, it's important to know, because I think if you again, this is where the principles are so important, because they touch one another. If we look at our world right now and we say, well, how, and because I've heard this line before, well, look at cancer, look at the tsunamis, look at all these other things that are going on in the world. If he's a creator who created this, then what kind of a creator is he? How can he be good if he created these things? And this is why God has been so good to us in revealing himself in his word, in the person of his son Jesus, is that these things are results of the fall. Right. They are not part of his original creation. And so back to Romans, where Romans says even creation, and personified here, as Paul records it, even creation groans, wanting to be loosened from the bondage that occurred as a result of humanity choosing to rebel against God. So when I just want to, and I know you're not saying this, but sometimes it would be, I hear people, well, this world is, if this is what God is, then I don't want any part of it. Like, no. This is what his creation became. Right. As a result of our decisions. Yeah. So, yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. Is that we have to be very careful whenever we talk about God being the creator. Yes, he is the creator. But this is not the creation, the perfect world that he initially created and he designed us to live in and live within. Yes. He designed us. This is why we read about the Garden of Eden, and that's paradise. That's what everything was supposed to be like. And I don't think we have any idea any imagination of what that was supposed to be, of how that actually worked, of what that was actually like. Because it talks about how Adam and Eve, and Adam specifically, walked with God.
Yes.
And had a relationship with God. And
yes.
as his creation, he created us in a unique way to be image bearers of him. But we were created to be image bearers of him as we are in relationship with him, so that we could know him and reflect who he is in the way that he created us to be.
And even in those moments, you're talking about the principle of God being a creator God. When he created man and created woman and then put them in the garden to tend to the garden and to cultivate it.
Right.
And so even they had a purpose,
Right.
which was tied to God's identity. Their identity was shaped by his identity. Just as God created and cultivated the world, now as image bearers, they were to cultivate and maintain what God had given them.
Right.
Yeah.
But just like you said, the world around us does not reflect that. Right. And it's because of the fall. It's because instead of staying within the relationship and within the world that God created Adam and Eve for, let's take it to these principles and perspectives and purposes. God gave Adam and Eve principles, perspectives, and purposes and priorities that they could live within that would perfectly reflect who he is. And as they learned and continue to grow into knowing who God is, their ability to reflect who God is and glorify him would be even greater. But this is the sad part, is that in the fall, their perspective of who God is and their relationship to who God is was forever corrupted. Yeah. And that ability to have that direct relationship with God was lost to them because of sin, their corrupted identity. Instead of staying in obedience with understanding that he is God, he is creator, he is before everything and above everything, and we are his creation created to glorify him, they decided to make decisions independent of him and try to become something independent of him. And he allowed that to happen. But then that, as you said, has this ripple effect through time of causing just further corruption, not just within ourselves, but within creation.
And what a ripple. I think that's one of the things about the Christian perspective, the Christian worldview, that explains so well the problem of suffering. That every person who has a conscience and has a pulse, basically, if you're alive, the problem that we bump into is, why is there so much suffering and hardship in the world? And I think not only does God reveal himself in such a way that allows us to understand it, but then he gives us a pathway out. That we don't have to stay in this place of distance from God.
Right.
And that even as you're talking about it and talking about God being a creator, that when people talk about, well, this is just who I am. I was born this way. This is just my natural, like, no. The beauty is that you were created to be a certain way. That is true.
Correct.
And that is beautiful. But each one of us has been corrupted. Our identities have been twisted. So we're no longer from Ephesians 2. And I love that when you and I were talking about it, when Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's workmanship, we are God's poem, and that poem has been erased and rewritten in such a way that we no longer reflect the nature and character of God.
Right.
And the beauty of this recreation of God giving us new life in Christ so that we would be new creations,
Mm-hmm.
is that we can actually become who he created us to be.
Yeah, that's
So,
amazing.
yeah.
And I think the other part of this is start talking about God being a creator is not just that he is a creator, because that's a purpose. That's what he does. And not only is it that he creates for his glory. He creates everything to reflect who he is. That's priority. But the other purpose that I always found that I think is so tied to what we're talking about here, it comes from Colossians, where it says that everything was made for him and everything is sustained by him. So that everything that exists not only is created, it's that it's like he creates it and then lets it go, but that everything is sustained. Everything continues because that is his will.
Yeah.
That is his desire.
And again, those principles, those truths of who God is, that's the amazing perspective shifts that is capable within that. Is God is not distant. He is active.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a deist God, which is uninvolved, just winds the world up and lets it go. But instead, that sustaining part means that quite literally every beat of my heart, every breath that I have, the neurons firing in my brain, the ability for my brain to send signals to my hands so I can wiggle my fingers, all of that is enabled by God's sustaining power.
Right.
Yeah. Huge.
And as I was reflecting about this, reflecting on this idea, this concept that God is the creator and everything belongs to him and everything is sustained by him. And so many times we want to put ourselves in that position of God. And I just go, as I look at this, I would make an awful God. Because I would look at creation like the Etch and Sketch. It's like the moment that it went off track, I would just like be the person that says, okay, let's just shake it up and restart.
Yep.
Because the patience that I would have with anything just going off the rails, and not just going off the rails, but being actively rebellious and determined to go off the rails. I would just want to just like take it and just go, it's like, okay, let's start over and like see if we can get a like, let's try this again. This is his creation. And he loves his creation. And he desires for his creation. He desires for us to know him. That he, instead of just doing what I think so many of us would do, which is just start over, he has been patiently working, sustaining, planning, and doing what he needed to do to get to the point that he had a plan even before creation. The Bible says that he knew that this was all going to happen. So even before the foundations of the world, he knew what was going to happen, and he knew that he was going to have a plan where he was going to have to send Jesus to live as part of his creation and to take the penalty for our sin.
I love it because this is the beauty of God's self-revelation. When Hebrews talks about that, in the past that God had revealed himself in many ways, but in the final days, he reveals himself through Jesus. And so the most perfect understanding that we can have of God is God himself, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus. And so, yeah, what you're saying, and one of the things that is accomplished through the fall. One of the outcomes of the fall, as horrific as it was and is in terms of the implications and the impacts it has on us now, is that we are able to see God's character displayed. And you nailed it with the patience, the long suffering. And I would just say everything you said about being a God of the universe. I'd be a terrible God. I would be a capricious, temperamental, etch-a-sketch is a polite way of saying it, but I would just be zapping people left and right because I am not as much patience as God has given me. I am not patient nearly. If he holds all things together, it means that the breath that people use to curse God, he has given them.
Right.
In his grace, he allows his creation to be in open rebellion and continues to love them. That is the kind of God that once we really dig into those details, for me, it leads to worship. It leads to, this is a God that is big enough to consume all of my heart. This is a God who is big enough to occupy my deepest thoughts and affections.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of the God's Fingerprint in Creation episode of the He's So I podcast, produced by Redeeming Identity. This podcast is produced for everyone who desires to know God and through that discover who they were created to be. If you found this episode challenging, encouraging, informative, please take a moment and subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified when future episodes are released. Speaking of future episodes, you will not want to miss part 2 of this episode, where we discuss the "so I can be" part of God being the creator. You can also find more information, including a Bible study, at our website at redeemingidentity.com. We look forward to our next conversation and you joining us in that conversation as part of the He's So I project.